If you go ahead and pass those out too, I'd appreciate it.
We knew very quickly that the loss that we were dealing with was different from the loss of others, and even the loss of other parents who had lost their child in different stages than we lost our child. And so grief takes on many different faces. But one of the reasons we also did this workshop was not just to help us work through our loss, but also to equip us to help other people in their loss. Because if you've ever been through any amount of grief, you know how other people at times struggle to comfort you. They struggle to support you in that loss. We don't, and especially sometimes as Americans, we don't always know how to face the loss of other people and to walk with them in that grief. And so that's one of the things I know that we're going to talk
Hey,
about.
Charlene, why don't you go ahead and pass
Go
this
ahead,
out too?
pass those out now.
Yeah.
And just so y'all know as well, we are streaming these. So if later if you want to watch it again, you go to our YouTube channel, Ribbon Creek Church of Christ. We'll be there for you to watch again. So hopefully, or maybe you have a spouse who wasn't able to make it and they want to watch it, then I would encourage them to watch that as well. But before we get going, we're going to go ahead and start with a word of prayer, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dean. Let's pray together. Our God and our Father, Lord of heaven and earth, we come before you this morning, and Lord, we're thankful for this opportunity to be able to come and to discuss loss, to be able to talk about our pain, to be able to find ways to work through it. We're thankful for Dean and his word, and we pray your blessings upon him. We pray your blessings upon our hearts this morning. Father, we know that you are close to the brokenhearted.
Amen.
And we pray, Father, that you will bless us and keep us as we go throughout the seminar, that our hearts will be open to you, and that it will be open to your peace. Pray blessings on everyone here, and I know that each of them is dealing with a different loss, or even expecting loss. I pray that you will walk through them with it. You grant them community, help, and aid in those times of difficulty. That we can comfort those that you comfort us. In the name of Christ we pray.
Amen. Well, good morning. Let me thank you for coming this morning. There are some other places that you could have been, other things you could have chosen to do, but you chose to come here. And one reason why I'm very impressed by your choice is that fact that would we be willing to admit that what we human beings do sometimes with things that we perceive to be negative or potentially uncomfortable or painful, what do we do in regard to those things? We have a tendency to back away from those things because we want to protect our comfort zone. You have chosen to come to a workshop where we're going to be dealing with what is generally perceived to be negative stuff, loss, and the impact of loss. I remember being at the Equip conference in Orlando, Florida, and this at a vendor space I had there for the ministry. There was this lady that came up to me, and when she saw what the vendor space was about, and she saw a form of that word widow, widowhood, she said, "Oh, I don't talk about negative stuff, and I don't read about negative stuff." And I thought, do you ever experience negative stuff? The reality is we're going to experience negative stuff in the world we live in. That's just the way the world is. And I appreciate you being willing to come here, and I promise you this. I can confidently say, without fear of successful contradiction, that when you leave here today, you will leave with things that you will learn, things that you will be exposed to that you've never known previously, things that you've never been exposed to previously. I think I can share that statement and be very confident about it. Now, it's important that we recognize the fact that though we may experience a lot of losses in our life, don't lose your sense of humor. The Bible says that a merry heart, in Proverbs 17, is good like medicine. So we make it a point when we're talking about negative stuff to also provide a little bit of occasional levity. So let me share with you a prayer that I don't know if you've ever prayed this before, or if you want a copy of this to take home with you, probably Regina could make a copy for you. Thank you, Lord. I've done all right so far. I haven't gossiped, I haven't lost my temper, I haven't been greedy, grumpy, nasty, selfish, or overindulgent, and I'm very thankful for that. But in a few minutes, Lord, I'm fixing to get up out of bed, and from then on, I'm going to need a lot of help. Be with me, Lord. Amen. Hey, I got some bad news about Cheryl Wayne LaHawn. Cheryl, he calls himself my gopher, and he drove here from Carthage, Missouri, from southwest Missouri. And if you ever want to go to Branson and visit Branson, use his house as an Airbnb. Now, he's still going to stay there, but he's a fellow who provides some real nice hospitality for people who want to come to Branson. But I have some bad news about Cheryl Wayne. The bad news is this morning, he took the wrong medicine. He takes medicine, you know, like a lot of us. The good news is he's free of ticks and fleas for 30 months now because of taking the wrong medicine. So he's good to go today. Seriously, we want to talk about some pretty challenging things, and I have some good news for you. I did not come here to preach at you. Now, Lord willing, I hope you come Sunday morning. I will preach at you Sunday morning during worship. But the rest of the time, what I want to do is I want to encourage us to think out loud together. That's what I want us to do. Think out loud together. I'm not going to force you to speak up, but I want you to feel free to do that. You can even leave your cell phone on. If you hear it ring, that's fine. If you need to get up and stretch, that's fine too. Just go stand up in the back of the auditorium. This is a relaxed atmosphere, and I just want to think out loud together with you, and I want you to participate in this orally as much as you would like to. Now, what we're going to talk about is life, love, and loss in this first session. And the place to begin when you're talking about life, love, and loss is where we live life. And so I want to ask you to give me a word or a phrase that you would use to describe the world that we live in. Give me a word or a phrase. Surely in a group this large, we can come up with maybe 5, half a dozen maybe. Give me a word or phrase that describes the world that we live in. Chaotic, okay. Immoral. As a matter of fact, 1 John 5:19 says, the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. No wonder there's so much immorality. 1 Peter 5 and verse 8 says, the devil like a roaring lion walks about seeking whom he may devour. There's sin and there's temptation everywhere. The devil is at work, just like God in his providence is at work. So chaotic, immoral. Give me another few words. Lost our minds, okay. How about crazy? We live in a crazy world, don't we? You know, don't you just shake your head sometimes? The things that you hear about that people think or believe or talk about or share, doesn't it just cause you to wonder what in the world has happened to our world? It is crazy. We human beings are really good at messing up the blessings God gives us. Proof of that is in the marriage statistics. Proof of that also is in all the dysfunctional families that we have. You know, when you stop and think about marriage and about family, boy, precious blessings, but we sure know how to mess them up, don't we? We are really good at messing up God's blessings. And that's what creates a lot of the stress and strain we experience in this life. Now, how about a couple more? Somebody else? Painful. Painful, ill-prepared, and we're often ill-prepared for our pain. H. Norman Wright, in a book called Reflections of a Grieving Spouse, said that it is really hard to grieve effectively, and grief is a painful thing to experience. He said it's very hard to grieve effectively in a grief-illiterate world that doesn't like to talk about loss or the impact of loss in our lives. You know, it's just like we want to ignore, as if we want to ignore the subject. Well, the reality is we should not choose to ignore things that are inevitable. One of the things that's inevitable in a fallen, broken world is loss. We are going to experience loss. Bum Phillips is one of my favorite NFL coaches of a past time. I love that old fella. Houston Oilers. He was the coach of the Houston Oilers and the New Orleans Saints. And he'd be on the sidelines there with a pair of jeans and a cowboy hat. Only coach I ever saw in a cowboy hat during the game. He made this observation. He said, in regard to coaches in football, in the NFL, he said there's two kinds of NFL coaches. He said there's them that's been fired and them that's going to be fired. Well, in this world, there are two kinds of people. Them that's experienced pain, the pain of loss, and them that's going to experience the pain of loss. One of the realities in our world is we never get to keep our blessings as long as we would like to. Cheryl Wayne and I were in a place called Prescott, Arkansas. And in the foyer, I met this lady who was 93 years old. And she was at church that morning, and she had her walker. And I engaged in conversation with her, and I asked her she had mentioned the fact that she'd been married and lost her husband. And so I asked her about, where'd you meet your husband? And how long were you married? And she said, I was married for 63 years. But you know what she said before that? When I asked her the question, how long were you married? She said, with great firmness, not long enough. And she looked at me like that, kind of sternly, not long enough. 63 years wasn't long enough. I've never heard somebody say it was long enough. We'd love to be able to keep our blessings. Our children, our grandchildren, our spouses, our friends, all the physical blessings we have, we'd love to be able to keep them all the time. But the reality is we suffer loss. And loss causes us to grieve. So we live in a fallen world where bad things happen. I want you to look at this picture, and I want you to tell me what this picture communicates to you. When you see this picture, what does it tell you? Balance? How is it balanced? There's what? Amen, sister. More blessings. But that's not how we look at life. Is that what you said? Can I take you home with me? I love your frankness. Oh, okay. You're a retired teacher? You need to meet Cheryl Wayne. He's a retired teacher too, elementary school. Okay, now I'm going to read you a verse out of the Bible, and I'm going to ask you to think about this verse in regard to what you see on the screen. Now, this is Job. Now, what kind of man was Job? Before I read this, I want to make sure you remember who Job was. What kind of man was Job? Patient? Righteous. Patient. Righteous. Yeah, he was a questioner, wasn't he? Yeah. Well, in James chapter 5, he is noted as a person of great endurance, patient in that sense. Now, so he's not a liar, right? Job is not a liar. Now, I'm going to read you a verse out of the Bible. This is chapter 14, verse 1. Job chapter 14, verse 1. Man that is born of woman. Do you know any other way to get born than born of woman? I'm not asking politicians here, okay? We live in a crazy world, don't we? Weird, crazy world. Okay. Man who is born of woman is a few days. Now, was he right about that? Few days. Was he right about that? We're born of woman, few days. Now, if he's right about that, why, when people reach 90 or 100, do we celebrate that achievement as if it was a big deal? And we'll post on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll brag about their long life. Job said, few days. Now, is it few days, or is it a long life? If you get up to 90 plus, maybe even 100 plus. Which is true? Few days or long life? It's both, kind of depends on your perspective, right? You know, here's a suggestion I would make for all of us. Always seek to see things the way God sees them. Now, that can be very hard for us. You know, we're just mere mortal human beings living in a broken world, so it can be very hard to see things the way God does. Let me tell you about a come to Jesus moment I had in my life. I was driving on Van Drive in Jackson, Tennessee. This was a couple years after my wife passed away. It was during a phase in my life when I couldn't listen to music. A lot of music is romantic in nature, and I just had to get away. I just couldn't listen to music on the radio. So that's the period in my life when I got hooked on News Talk Radio. So I was listening to this News Talk radio station in Jackson, Tennessee, and there was this guy who was preaching or teaching. I have no idea what his name was. I have no idea what church he was from. He made this observation, and wow, this really struck me. He said, wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. Boy, a light came on. I thought, that is great. That is a great observation. You know, when you see marriage and family the way God does, you have wisdom about marriage and family. When you see church the way God sees it, you have wisdom about church. When you see the Bible the way God sees the Bible, you have wisdom about the Bible. When we see things the way God sees it, we have wisdom. Well, what is 90 plus or 100 plus years to God? It's just a drop in the proverbial bucket, isn't it? Just a drop. Maybe not even a drop. You know, in James chapter 4 and verse 14, he says, it's like a vapor that appears, talking about not the quality of our life, but the length of our life. It's like a vapor that appears for a little time, and then what happens? Vanishes away. Little time is the phrase that's used. Now, have you noticed that? Let's say a child is born into this world, and they pass away after 6 months. Something happens. And then what do we call the length of that life? It's short, right? It's brief, isn't it? Okay. What if the child lived to, let's say, 7 years? I just came from Pikeville, Kentucky last weekend. The preacher and his wife there, back October of last year, lost Andrew, their 7-year-old son. Inexplicable. They don't even know for sure why he died. Probably, maybe, they think RSV, but they don't know. 7 years old. What's the length of that life? It's short, isn't it? Now, what if a person had cancer and they suffered with that disease for 7 years and they went through treatments and they had surgeries? What word do we use to describe 7 years of suffering with cancer? They suffered a long time, didn't they? Experience has a way of affecting our perception. Our experiences have a way of affecting our perception about things. Now, in regard to time, you know, it's a pretty short time, isn't it, that we have here? Whether it's 6 months, 7 years, or over 90 years, or over 100 years, it's a pretty short time. I think Job was right, speaking from a divine perspective, as God would look at it. Man that's born of woman is a few days. Now watch the last phrase, and full of trouble. Now here's what I want to ask you. Is there a difference? Isn't there a difference between what Job said in Job 14 verse 1 and what you see on the screen up there? He said, man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Note that last phrase, full of trouble. Was Job right? Or is the screen right? This bottle right here says it has 12 fluid ounces in it. Now, if I were to take the top off of this and drink it to about down here, what would we call this bottle? Half full or half empty. You know, there's a third perspective. If the water level were right here, a person could say it's full. What's it full of? If the water level is right here, what's it full of? It's full of two things. It has water in it, but what else does it have in it? There's air. It's full. Now, if something's full, can you put anything else in it? Like in John chapter 2, when Jesus performed that miracle of water into wine, when the containers were filled up, what did he tell them to do in regard to the quantity put in those containers? It was to be filled up how full? Right up to the brim. Okay? Now, if something's full, what else can you put in it? He said full of, Job said, a good godly man said full of trouble. Was his life full of trouble? Now, I want you to think about, now, we all know that he lost a lot, right? Okay? He lost his children. Anybody remember how many children he had? 10. 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now, when you stop and think about this, people lose children. It happens. It's so not right. It's so unfair. It's so unnatural. We bury people who are older than us. We don't bury people who are younger than us, especially our own children. That is awful. That is just an awful thing to experience in life. But it happens. Now, he lost not a child. He lost every single child they had. 10 children. Do you think that'd do a number on you? Do you think your thinking would be real clear? And do you think your feelings would be a mess if you lost 10 children? Now, he also, he lost his health, didn't he? Sat there like in pitiful shape with a potsherd, a broken piece of pottery, scraping himself. I mean, he was in misery. He lost his health. Now, boy, he had a rough time, didn't he? He lost the support of his wife. You know, we think about her saying, "Curse God and die." That may have been a cry of mercy, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But maybe he lost the support of his wife too. He suffered a lot of loss. Now, did he have any blessings? When he was in the worst shape that he was in, considering all the losses he had, did he have any blessings? He said, full of trouble. Did he have any blessings? Let me ask you this. What was his marital state? What box would he have checked if he was asked about his marital state? Married, right? Is that a blessing? Do you know what some of us would give to have a second bite of the marital apple? He was blessed to have a wife. You know, if you're going through really difficult times, you know what's really nice? To have somebody together to experience that with you, because you can be helpful to one another. Whenever you're in that marital state and you have a wife or you have a husband, you have somebody to enjoy the blessings with that magnifies the value and the experience of those blessings. And then when you go through troubled times, then that person helps you to deal with those struggles. It is a wonderful thing to be married. He was married. He had a blessing of being married. Now, he may not have had any children, but he had a wife. Now, let me ask you this. Did he have any friends? Okay, what do we usually think about his friends? Anytime you mention about Job's friends, what do we automatically think about them? Miserable comforters, low good, awful friends. They should have kept their mouth shut. Amen.
Because most friends, I apologize to the two people that asked me when I walked in how I was doing. Don't ask. Most people may not even know that. And if we don't take an opportunity to educate people, that means we need to know the person. Don't ask questions to the two people, hard question to answer. That in itself gives an education opportunity if
Yeah.
they're listening. Why?
We're going to talk about that in the second session. Let me read to you Job 2, verse 11. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Now look at what it says here in Job 2, verse 11. I'm going to read it word for word. For they made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. One of the suggestions I would make to people about ministering to others who are suffering is be exactly like Job's friends. Exactly like Job's friends. They dropped everything in their life and they went to where Job was. They didn't send him a text or an email and said, hey, Job, how about you come and live with us for a while? You're going through a really hard time. They dropped do you think they had a life? Do you think they had a honey-do list? If they were married, I guarantee you they did. Well, they dropped everything in their life and they went to Job. Do you know what we are as children of God? We are God's first responders. Do you know what a first responder does when you hear the shot of the gun? Where do you go? You go to the sound of the gunfire. When the house is burning, what do? You run to where the house is burning, and if you can, you run into the house. God's first responders. We drop everything and we go to people who are hurting. Now, not only did they drop everything and come to him, they came for the right reason. They did not have any intention of hurting Job, none whatsoever. It says at the end of the verse, the purpose for which they came, to mourn him and to comfort him. They dropped everything in their life and they came to the presence of a friend. They sat with him, it says in verse 13, for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word. They ministered to him by their presence. Do you know what is way more valuable than anything you could ever say? Your presence. With somebody who's hurting, who's had a son or a daughter develop an addiction, somebody who has lost a parent, somebody who's lost a child, somebody who's found out that they have cancer, somebody who is struggling. What we need to do as God's first responders is go and be with people. Don't feed me this line about it's out of my comfort zone. I want you to think about something. In regard to that whole business of us protecting our comfort zone, and we're really determined to do that. A lot of us are in our culture. We need to stop that. We need to stop being so concerned about our comfort zone. Let me offer you a perspective that might challenge you and really motivate you to get involved in the hurts of other people and their lives. God's will is for us to comfort one another, to love one another, and to help one another. If we don't do that because we think it would threaten our comfort zone, do you know what we have become? We have become idolaters. Because you know what is more important than God's will to us at that point? Our comfort zone. There are many forms of idolatry other than having some physical thing that you bow down to and claim to worship and claim to be your God. If we are bound and determined to comfort our comfort zone, more than we are compelled to go help hurting people, what we have done is we have become a kind of idolater. Don't worry about your comfort zone. Go and help hurting people. No matter how uncomfortable it makes you feel, go and help them. Yes, sir.
In order to do that, we have to have our eyes open, ears open, shut.
Eyes open, ears open, and mouths shut. Because it's only when they open their mouths that they morphed into miserable comforters. But that's not how they started. So actually, when ministering to people who are hurting, I have 2 suggestions. Number 1 is be like Job's friends. And number 2, don't be like Job's friends. Don't be like his friends in that you are going to explain about all these things that you think you know about. One of the things we're going to talk about in another session is don't ever say to somebody, I know how you feel. Don't, because you don't. There's no way you possibly could. But you can go and minister to them by your presence. Well, the point I'm trying to make is, Job did have blessings, right? As a matter of fact, when he was struggling so much, he had another blessing that hasn't been mentioned yet. Did he have God in his life? Is that a blessing? As a matter of fact, that blessing, if that was the only thing you had, let's say you had no other blessing, all you had was God, would that still be true? Yes, because of the quantitative value of having God in your life. Now, despite the fact he was a great man of God, he had God in his life. Now, we talk about Job's wife snapping. Let me show you where Job snapped. I don't know how many times I read this verse in the Bible, and it never sunk in. Now, this is Job 7, verse 6. You've heard the first part of this verse, probably at memorial services. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. He's talking about his personal life. Some of you, especially, I better use the royal us. Some of us are older than dirt. And we can testify to the fact, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. Now watch the last part of that verse, and are spent without hope. Was Job without hope? Did he have God in his life? He had God in his life and he had hope, but he didn't feel like it. I can't help but wonder if when God heard Job say those words, if maybe there was a salty tear that fell down the cheek of God. And God wonders, Job, what about me? Don't you have me? See, the experiences that we have in life, no matter how much life experience we have, no matter how strong of a Christian we've been, no matter how long we've been a Christian, the fact is, experiences that we have in life can dramatically affect us in ways that we cannot even imagine until we experience them. And Job struggled mightily. As a matter of fact, in chapter 42, he explains to God with a penitent heart, I was way out of line. I said stuff I should have never said. You know, it says Job did not sin nor charge God foolishly. That's in the first 2 chapters. That's not said after chapter 3. The fact is, Job, a great man of God, was greatly affected by his life, to the point that he thought his life was full of trouble when he was so richly blessed. There is never a time in your life when you are more burdened than you're blessed. Never. No matter what you're experiencing in life, there is never a time as a child of God that you are more burdened than blessed. You are always more blessed than burdened. You may not feel that way. Our feelings are not always consistent with reality or truth. But it's always true, we're more blessed than we're burdened. But sometimes our feeler shouts so strongly when we're struggling with a difficult time in our life, we feel things that are not consistent with truth. Job had hope because he had God. He also had blessings. His life was not full of trouble, but that's how he felt. Whenever we're going through hard times, whenever we're stressed by things we experience, we sometimes will say extreme things. Like, for instance, the woman that just climbed the ladder of her husband. You never take out the trash. And he said, hey, last week on Wednesday, I took out the trash. I mean, at least once I did. But see, sometimes when we get upset, we'll say and think things in the extreme. And that's what happened with Job. And that's what can happen to us. Now, what we need to do is we need to keep reminding ourselves about something. We have a bunch of blessings. And that's why I love it when we get together and we remind ourselves about how blessed we are. Cheryl Wayne's going to lead us in this song. We're going to sing 4 verses of this song, and then we're going to sing the chorus only once at the end. Cheryl Wayne, lead us in this song, and watch the words in this song now, maybe like you never have before, because of what we just talked about. Let's sing this song.
When up on life's billows you are tempest tossed,
when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord hath done. burdened with a load of care. Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? Count your many blessings, every doubt will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. When you look at others with their lands and gold, think that Christ has promised you his wealth untold. Count your many blessings money cannot buy, your reward in heaven or your home on high. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend. Comfort give you to your journeys in. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. Enjoying our blessings can cause us to have a strong attachment to those blessings. Does anybody know the name of the boy who has his tongue stuck to the pole? I'm curious. No, that's not Ralphie. Ralphie's on the other side. Oh, you're so close. Okay, I'll concede to you. None of you picked up your phone to check on that. In my Ohio State bag up here, we need to give Jackie a prize because she came really close to remembering Flick. Flick is the boy. Now, if you go on YouTube, you can plug in YouTube Triple Dog Dare, and you can see this scene in that movie. Now, Jackie is going to get a present from Buc-ee's because I'm a big Buc-ee's fan, and she's going to get it out of my Ohio State bag that I carry around.
You forgot to go to Dollar General and fill the bag up.
I know, but there's something in there.
Yeah, one thing.
Yeah, one thing. Jackie's going to get one thing.
Oh, it's almonds.
It's chocolate-covered almonds from Buc-ee's. Okay, so Flick, do you think he intended on getting his tongue stuck to the pole? No, but it happened. Now, let me ask you about these critters that we get that have 4 legs. And when we bring them to the house, we have decided to get a 3-letter word thing that starts with a P. What is it? It's a pet. Pet. Now, over time, that pet morphs into what? We become so attached, what do we call it? Our babies. It's a member of our family. It's like our child. Over time, see, we can become attached to things that we don't intentionally plan on becoming so attached to. Now, do you know there are pet cemeteries? You got to go to Wiley, Texas. It was the coolest pet cemetery I've ever seen. When we were in Wiley, Texas together, we were driving down the road headed to the church building there. On the right-hand side, I saw this cemetery and I thought, wow, that's a really cool cemetery. On second glance, it was a pet cemetery. I was in Goshen, Indiana, up near the Michigan border, and driving to that church building. Again, on the right-hand side, there was a pet cemetery. I had to stop and take a picture of that sign. I've never done a pet funeral yet, but there are 2 Australian Labradoodles who reside in Gainesville, Florida, that belong to 2 of my grandchildren. If Ranger or Sonny dies, we might have to do a memorial service for a dog. Do any of you remember the very first episode of Bill Cosby, that show? There was a fish that died, and they had a memorial service for that fish they'd become very attached to right at the toilet before they dropped the dead fish into the toilet and flushed him down the toilet. Isn't it funny how we can become attached to things just over time with experience? Okay, now, what I want you to do, think out loud with me now. I want you to think about things that we become very attached to that if we lose them, it would really shake us up. Now, don't think about people. Think about things things that we might have that if we lose them, it would really hurt us. It would shake us up, cause us to grieve. Name me something. Your phone, okay? Your life is in your phone, okay? Yeah. Family photos. What about the loss of a home? You know, that home, if you give me your address, I can go to Zillow.com, I can plug in your address, I can see the overvalued price they put on your home. It's always overvalued, rest assured. But it's just money, right? And brick, mortar, shingles, glass. What is the big deal about losing your house? Memories. Why are the memories important? What are the memories about? People. Life in 3 words. I can summarize life in 3 words. Here it goes. People, relationships, and circumstance. People, relationships, and experiences. That's life. People, relationships, and experiences. In that home, in that house that has a limited value, people lived there. And they had experiences together, and they cultivated relationships there. And the loss of that house is not just a monetary thing. There's a sentimental value that far exceeds the monetary value. And often when I've asked people who've lost their houses, what was the worst loss? It was the photographs. Those hard copy photographs. Now, you think about those hard copy photographs. Do you know what those are? They're a piece of paper. That's all they are. What makes that piece of paper, that hard copy picture, what makes that so valuable to you? Can't replace them. What's on that piece of paper that matters? It's not the paper, it's what's on them. People, relationships, and experiences. And they're ingrained on a piece of paper. And that's what makes that piece of paper special. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Matthew 6:21. Our heart follows our treasure. What we treasure in our heart, that's valuable. I used to drive around a 2012 Nissan Versa, white hatchback. Whenever I decided to divest myself of that possession, I tried to find a man who, back in his past, had a 2012 Nissan Versa, who maybe kissed the girl that became his wife. Because I figured for him, that 2012 white Nissan Versa would have been more valuable to him. Maybe I could have gotten more money from him because of his memory and experience associated with that car. That car is now being driven by my 16-year-old granddaughter. So I didn't find the man. The point I'm trying to make is, see, we become attached to things. And just like we become attached to people, we become attached to things. Now think about things that you could lose that would really shake you up. Can you think of any other ones? Grandmother's paintings. Okay, they're just paintings, canvases, but they're the grandmother's paintings. Anybody here ever been diagnosed with cancer? Cheryl Wayne has twice. What have you lost when you are diagnosed with cancer? Your health. When I was living in Murray City, Tennessee, my nurse practitioner was a member of the Estes Church in Chester County, and so he was a brother in the Lord. And I decided one time, when I was sitting waiting for him in that little room, I decided to address him this way when he came in. I didn't say hi or anything. He came in and I said, "Hey Brent, when do people appreciate their health?" What do you think he said just like that? When do people appreciate their health? When you lose it. Isn't that sad that we're that way? I mean, that's pretty pitiful, but we are pretty pitiful. You know, sometimes we don't realize how blessed we are. And sometimes we don't appreciate what we have until we've lost it. When a person's diagnosed with cancer, they've lost their health. Do you think a person's going to grieve? Yep, because that's a loss. What about parents that I feel deeply for? Godly parents who have invested so much of their lives, so much of themselves into their children, but their children have wandered away from the Lord. and they've lost their child to the world or to the devil. The restlessness, the deep concern, you can't change that. It's their life. You may have influence, but you have no control. That's a loss. What about the person who's gone through a divorce? Nobody says I do with the intention of getting a divorce. Boy, one thing we need to keep in mind is when people go through a divorce, there's grief, because that's a loss. They've lost their marriage. They've lost their companionship. They've lost the hopes and dreams they had whenever they said, I do. They have lost so much in a divorce, just like people who have lost their spouse to death have lost so much. We need to recognize the grief that's involved in that. When somebody has a leg amputated because they have a diabetic condition, they've suffered a loss. Do you think you'd grieve if you had a leg amputated? Sure you would. You may have taken that leg for granted, but now you see it was great value. How about the young lady on a college campus that's raped? She's lost her virginity in that violent experience. Do you think she's going to grieve? What about the godly young lady who grew up in the church and sincerely, truly loves the Lord, but in a moment of passion, she gifts her virginity to her boyfriend? Do you think she's going to grieve? Yep. See, there's so many things in our life that we could potentially lose. And what happens whenever we suffer loss of something or somebody that we're attached to, it has an impact on us. And we grieve. We struggle. That's just a part of being human. Now, I know that we struggle with having these bad things happen to us in our life. Let me offer to you a perspective that may help you in your perspective about your life and life in general in a fallen world. I have to credit T. Pierce Brown for writing an article way back in the late 1970s, I think it was, in the Gospel Advocate periodical. And after reading that article and doing a lot of other study, here is a statement I'd like to share with you and ask you to just think about this. I think this is a defensible perspective. Not everything that happens in this world is God's will. Now, I use the phrase God's will there in the sense of what He desires. Not His permissive will, but what He desires. Not everything that happens in this world is God's will, but in everything that happens, God has a will. When you're blessed, do you know what God's will is? For Him to be glorified and you to be a blessing to others. When you're suffering great adversity and you've experienced painful loss, do you know what His will is? It's the same thing, that He be glorified and we be a blessing to others. That's always God's will. That's always God's desire, that He be glorified and that we be a blessing to others. We exist for the praise of His glory. We exist to love others. We exist to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We exist for the purpose of glorifying God and serving others. Not everything that happens in this world is what God wants to happen. God doesn't want domestic violence. God doesn't want a drunk to get behind the wheel of a car, go left of center and maim or take the life of people on the other side. But God does have a will in everything that happens. We need to recognize that, and we need to try to make that our purpose in life. Use everything that you are experiencing in your life, everything that you have experienced in your life, to the praise of His glory by seeking to help others. Now, there is a book written by William Bridges called Transitions, just one word. The subtitle of the book is Making Sense of Life's Changes. Great book. Brother Jerry Barber introduced me to this book when I was doing some schooling with him in regard to what he calls interim ministry. It was required reading. Great book. I'm going to save you about 200 pages of reading right here by showing you two images. This is what the book is all about. It's all about how in life we experience change. Some of the changes we choose in our life, some of the changes we are forced to deal with in our life. We didn't want, we didn't choose, we're forced to deal with them. Loss is something we're forced to deal with. No one prays to the Lord, Lord, give me loss so I can appreciate my blessings more. Lord, give me loss so I can praise you more and help others. We don't want loss, but we're forced to deal with it. Well, whenever we experience change, what's going to happen is a new beginning. Whether we like it or not, there's going to be a new beginning. Now, what we need to recognize whenever we're struggling with that change is there's what's called a neutral zone. William Bridges calls it a neutral zone. It's a period in your life when you're experiencing change, when you haven't got to your new beginning yet, but you're working toward the new beginning. Now, there's no telling how long you might be in that neutral zone or what kind of effort it might take for you to get to the new beginning. You need to be patient with yourself. We need to be patient with others, too, who are struggling and others who are trying to help us. Now, when you're in this neutral zone, here's the way I depict it. It's like you being life-flighted and dropped into a forest. This is a really weird forest. In this forest, there are no footprints and there are no pathways, but there are people. See, if you were in a forest and you were lost and you didn't have any idea where you were at, you'd probably follow footprints or you'd find a path because you knew somebody went that direction and eventually, hopefully, got out. Now, there are people in this forest, but no footprints and no pathway. You've got to decide how to get out of this forest. Now, you're going to have people that you're going to interact with in this period of your life. Some of them are going to be helpful. They're going to be considerate. They're going to be comforting. They're going to be encouraging. You're probably going to also interact with people who are going to be hurtful in this phase of your life. One of the hurtful things we do to other people who are hurting is we neglect them. You know, we talk about verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. Neglect is a form of abuse. Neglect hurts. Do you know that most people who lose a precious person in their life, they lose 75% of their social network? 75% of their social network. You're going to be avoided. You're going to be neglected. That's just a given. You're going to make people feel uncomfortable because of what you've gone through, and they don't know how to deal with you. And so you're going to lose a significant part of your social network. You're going to have people neglect you. You're also going to have people say things to you that are going to be hurtful. Like the young lady who's had a miscarriage. Honey, don't worry. You're young. You can be pregnant again. Well, number one, how do you know that? And number two, she doesn't need to be thinking about that. She needs to be thinking about the child she lost. She needs to be grieving deeply her loss and not thinking about those other things. And then a person who comes to the widowed person. And shouldn't you be out of that house by now? That's way too big of a house for you. Whose business is that? It's the person left behind. But sometimes people think that they know better. Just like Job's 3 friends, they were great at the beginning, but then they opened up their mouths. Here's something you can Google sometime. Dumb things said by caring people. Google that phrase. Dumb people. Oh boy. What day of the week is this? And what state am I in? Dumb things caring people say. Now make sure when you do that you have a little bit of time, because it's a pretty long list. And brace yourself for when you read it, because I'll bet you're in it. I've said some of those same things. Until I experienced loss, and until I read with an insatiable desire a lot of things written by people who've suffered great loss, I said some of those things, some of those same things. There are going to be people who are going to be hurtful. There are going to be a few people, hopefully, that are helpful. But you're going to have questions about your brothers and sisters in the Lord, about your church family, about your neighbors, about maybe your children or your grandchildren, because it's not going to be like you would like it to be always. And you're going to have people who are helpful, people who are hurtful. Yes, sir?
One of the things is that we become, as you're referring to, is that we're a leper.
Yeah.
And because of that, we're stuck in a club that until
Nobody wants to be in.
but we're all going to be forced to be in it. But as far as the people in the church, when you have step forward to assist from the time that they are diagnosed with cancer, in my case, my wife, then death, and nobody steps forward. That is an indictment against the leadership of not only that congregation, but the Lord's church.
Thank you for indicting me. I am guilty of that. For decades in my life, I did not understand, especially the widowed community. I neglected the widowed people in a church that I was with for 33 years. I was with many, almost every single one of them, pre-loss, at loss, and right after loss. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't understand what it was like to live with that loss. Well, I know now. I hate widowhood. I know now. I would never say to another person who suffered great loss, I know how you feel, because I don't. But I'll tell you what, I can relate to people a whole lot better, and I understand why people are neglected. Inexperience and ignorance. When you leave today, you will no longer be ignorant. You may still be inexperienced. Some maybe in this room have not experienced great loss yet. Eventually you probably will, but you're not going to be ignorant. When we're ignorant, here, let me give you a mathematical equation. Knowledge plus compassion equals effective ministry. Knowledge without compassion, ineffective ministry. Knowledge without compassion, or compassion without knowledge, will lead to ineffective ministry. We live in a grief illiterate society. Our church families are grief illiterate, and that's why we need to have workshops like this or Bible classes at church like this. We need to become more familiar. We cannot effectively minister to people when we are clueless about what they're going through in their life. And a lot of times, there's way too much neglect in the local church. We're great at immediate care. In our culture, even in our secular culture, we're great at immediate care. In the church, we are really great at immediate care. In regard to long-term care, we're pitiful because we don't understand the need for long-term care of people who have suffered great loss. We're going to take a break now, and I'm going to give you a 5-minute break. Please, we're going to get back here in 5 minutes, and let me threaten you, if you don't come back here on time in 5 minutes, because we do need to finish. We're going to finish at 12:15 today. Now, if you don't come back here on time, let me threaten you. I know Barry Manilow tunes. My favorite song is I Can't Smile Without You. If you hear me start singing that, you need to feel guilty because you're not here yet. Okay, take a break for 5 minutes.
Also, the front door is locked if you go outside.
And the front door's locked if you go outside. Somebody found that out. Upstairs, you can go ahead and pull up the next PowerPoint.